The day I looked at loyalty and finally called it what it actually is, that was the day my whole family rearranged itself around a truth nobody wanted to say out loud. I've been a patient man my whole life. Not passive, not soft. Patient. There's a difference, and most people don't understand it until the patience runs out. My name is Walter Kessler. I'm 64 years old, and I live alone in a two-story brick house on Larkfield Court in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of street where the maples turn gold in October and every driveway gets shoveled before the sun's fully up. I'm not lonely. I'm settled. There's a difference there, too. It was Thanksgiving weekend, the Saturday after, because my son-in-law's family always claimed the actual holiday, and my daughter had learned a long time ago not to fight that battle. Cold that year, the kind of Illinois cold that gets into your knees before it gets into your bones. I drove out to my daughter Melissa's place on Brookfield Lane, one of those newer builds with the stone facade on the front and vinyl siding everywhere the neighbors couldn't see. I'd co-signed the loan on that house. Nobody brought that up anymore either. I carried in a bottle of the Cabernet Melissa used to love before she married Craig, back when her taste in wine wasn't dictated by what Craig thought looked sophisticated at a dinner party, and I walked up to the door with a gift bag for her. A first edition of a novel she'd mentioned wanting years ago that I'd finally tracked down through a dealer in Wisconsin. Melissa opened the door before I could ring the bell. Dad. She smiled the way she'd been smiling at me for the better part of 2 years now. Careful, rehearsed, like she was checking a box. Hey, kiddo. I hugged her. She smelled like a perfume I didn't recognize. Craig materialized behind her in the doorway the way he always did, like he'd been standing just out of sight waiting for his cue. Gray quarter zip, sleeves pushed up, a handshake that came in a half-second too hard. Walter. Craig. I shook it. Same as it had been for 6 years. Dinner was in the dining room they only used for company, the one with the chandelier Melissa had picked out and the tablecloth that still had its fold lines from the box. She'd made the sweet potato casserole the way my late wife used to make it. I notice most things. People assume a quiet man isn't paying attention. It's usually the opposite. We were about 15 minutes into dinner when Craig started in, the way he always did, easing into himself like a man lowering into a hot bath. Slow, deliberate, savoring every degree of it. So I don't know if Mel mentioned it, he said, cutting into his turkey with more precision than turkey requires. But we're closing in on something big. Ridgeline Capital wants me running point on their new regional fund. She said something, I answered. It's a real opportunity, Walter. I mean, he paused, doing his impression of modesty, an impression Craig Voss had never once managed to make convincing. We're talking 11 figures under advisement eventually. The kind of position that changes everything for us. Melissa beamed at him, the same beam she used to give me when she brought home a report card. Isn't that incredible? That's a serious opportunity, I said, keeping my voice even. How'd you get in front of a firm like Ridgeline? Something moved behind Craig's eyes, quick, like a fish darting under still water. Relationships, he said smoothly. You put in the years, doors open eventually. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the casserole and chewed slowly, because I already knew exactly which relationship had opened that particular door, and it wasn't one Craig had built himself. Here's what nobody at that table knew yet. 4 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from an old friend, Douglas Feiner, a man I'd sat on investment committees with for almost 25 years before I stepped back from the firm. Douglas called because my name had come up in a due diligence packet crossing his desk at Ridgeline, listed as a personal financial reference and former mentor for Craig Voss. I had never given that reference. Nobody had asked me for it. Douglas, being Douglas, assumed I'd simply forgotten to mention it and called to congratulate me on my protégé's big break. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat at my kitchen table on Larkfield Court for a long time doing nothing but breathing. He'd used my name without a conversation, without so much as a text message. I'd spent 31 years building a reputation in Chicago's investment community, a name that meant something to men like Douglas Feiner, to compliance officers, to boards. That reputation wasn't luck. It was 3 decades of showing up, telling the truth, and never once cutting a corner, even when cutting it would have been easier. And Craig had folded that reputation up like a cocktail napkin and used it to get himself a seat at a table he hadn't earned. I didn't call him. I didn't call Melissa. I made my decision quietly, the way I make every important decision, and I waited. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded printout. "Craig," I said, keeping my voice level, "I need to ask you about something." He looked at the papers before I'd even unfolded them, and his jaw tightened just slightly. Melissa glanced between us. "What is that?" "It's a copy of the reference section from the Ridgeline due diligence file." I unfolded it slowly, smoothed it flat on the tablecloth, specifically the paragraph listing prior mentors and professional references. I turned it so he could read it. "My name's right here. Second reference listed." End quote. Silence. The kind that has actual weight to it, that presses down on a room. "Dad, what is that supposed to be?" "I never authorized this," I said, still calm, still even. "Craig never asked me, never mentioned Ridgeline to me at all. I found out because Douglas Finer called to congratulate me on something I had no idea I was a part of." Craig set down his knife. "Walter, look, it's not as simple as, I'm not finished." First time I'd ever said those words at that table. "I want my name pulled from that file. Every version of it. Every compliance packet it's attached to. By Monday." Craig leaned back in his chair, did that slow exhale through his nose. The recalibration breath, buying himself time. Then he looked at Melissa, and that's when the whole thing shifted. I watched him do it in real time, watched him run the calculation, watched him pick up his weapon. "Mel," he said, and his voice went soft, wounded. "Your father is trying to torpedo the biggest opportunity of my career. On Thanksgiving weekend, he let that hang in the air. I don't know what I did to make him want to see me fail like this, but that is not what's happening," I started. "He's worked 18 months on this, Dad." Melissa's voice was climbing. 18 months? And you're going to sit at my table and blow it up over paperwork? "He used my name without asking me, Melissa. That's not paperwork. That's fraud. It's a reference. It's not a reference if I never gave it." She stood up. Her chair scraped against the hardwood. She had her mother's eyes when she got like this, wide and certain and terrifying in the specific way that only someone who loves you can be terrifying. "You want to do this? Fine. Here's where we are, Dad. You apologize to Craig. Right now, you tell him you support us. Or you can find somewhere else to spend your holidays, because I will not have you sabotaging my husband's career at my own dinner table." The room went completely still. I looked at my daughter, this woman I had taught to ride a bike on Larkfield Court, sat up with through 2 bouts of pneumonia, walked down an aisle 6 years ago, and I saw something I'd been avoiding seeing for longer than I wanted to admit. She didn't need protecting from Craig. She was standing right beside him, arms crossed, waiting for me to fold the way I always folded. Craig's smirk was small and controlled, the smirk of a man who's watched someone cave 100 times and is expecting the 101st. I stood up slowly, looked my daughter in the eye. 6 words. Quiet, clear, final. "You'll regret saying that, sweetheart." I picked up my coat off the back of the chair and walked to the front door and didn't look back. They thought my silence was surrender. They thought I was driving home to sulk. They had no idea I was driving home to make one phone call. I got home at 7:12 that evening. I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock on the stove the second I walked in, the way you do when something significant has just ended and your brain wants a timestamp for it. The porch light was on a timer, and it had just clicked to life outside the kitchen window, that first orange glow against the early dark of late November. I set my keys on the counter and sat down at my kitchen table and didn't turn on the television, didn't call anyone, just sat there in the quiet of my house on Larkfield Court and let the last 2 hours settle over me like snow after a storm passes. 64 years old. I'd raised that girl alone the last 11 years of it, after her mother passed, driven her to school on ice-slicked mornings, sat in waiting rooms, missed sleep, missed meetings, swallowed my pride more times than I could count because the alternative, losing her the way I nearly lost her right after the funeral when she pulled away from everyone, was something I couldn't survive twice. And she'd stood across her own dinner table and told me to apologize to a man who'd stolen my name, or find somewhere else to spend the holidays. With him smirking behind her like he'd just won a hand of cards he hadn't even dealt fairly. I sat there a long while, maybe 40 minutes, maybe longer, and somewhere in that stillness, Something that had been wound tight in my chest for years just released. Not snapped, not exploded. Released, the way a man finally sets down a load he's carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his own body. I slept better that night than I had in 3 years. That part still surprises me when I think back on it. Most men would have tossed and turned, replaying the argument, drafting the apology they'd never send. Not me. I was out by 10 and up at 5:30, same as always. Coffee brewing before the sun. The house quiet in the particular way a house gets when a decision has already been made and there's nothing left to decide. Sunday passed without incident. I shoveled the front walk, called my old friend Douglas, not about the reference, just to check in, just to confirm lunch plans for the following week. Douglas asked if everything was all right. Everything's fine, I told him. Better than fine, actually. He laughed. Walter Kessler, you sound like a man who just made a decision. I did, I said, about 4 years too late. Monday morning came in gray and cold, the kind of Illinois sky that presses down flat and stays that way till noon. I dressed the way I used to dress when I still went into the office. Pressed shirt, good slacks, the watch my father left me. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because some phone calls deserved to be made standing up straight. I had exactly one call to make. Her name was Corinne Baptiste, 69 years old, senior compliance officer at Ridgeline Capital, a woman I'd known since 1997, back when we'd both sat on an ethics review panel for the Midwest Investment Council. We had lunch twice a year, minimum, for almost 3 decades. She'd spoken at my retirement dinner. She'd sent flowers when my wife died. Corinne Baptiste was the kind of woman who had spent 40 years in Chicago finance without ever once having her integrity questioned, which meant she valued integrity the way some people value money, personally and without apology. I dialed her direct line at 8:40. She picked up on the second ring. Walter. Warm, genuine. Please tell me you're finally coming back to work. Not quite, I said. Corinne, I need 10 minutes, and I need you to really hear me, because this is something I should have said to you the moment I found out. A pause. When she spoke again, the warmth stayed, but something else moved underneath it. Attention, the focused, serious kind. Go ahead. I told her everything, calmly, in order. No editorializing, no drama. I told her my name had appeared in Craig Voss's due diligence file as a personal reference and mentor. I told her I'd never been asked, never consulted, never given permission. I told her I had no professional relationship with Craig Voss whatsoever, no basis to vouch for his judgment or his practices, and that my name had been used without my knowledge to help him access a fund position worth, by his own account, 11 figures under eventual management. Then I said the part that mattered most. Corinne, I've known you 30 years. My name means something in this town or it doesn't, and I will not have it borrowed by a man I cannot vouch for, to open a door I never agreed to open. Silence on the line. Not an uncomfortable silence. A processing one. Walter, she finally said, and her voice had gone quiet and measured, the voice of someone who has just understood the full shape of a problem. Are you prepared to put that in writing? You'll have a signed statement in your inbox by noon. All right, another pause. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm not angry, Corinne. I just need my name back. We said our goodbyes. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment. That was it. 10 minutes. 31 years of reputation, and it only took 10 minutes to tell the truth about it. I typed up the statement myself, signed it, scanned it, and had it in Corinne's inbox by 11:15. I want to tell you I spent the rest of that Monday feeling triumphant, that I poured myself something and sat on the back porch feeling like a man who'd won. That isn't what happened. I went and sat with the grief of it instead, because here is the thing nobody tells you about finally setting the weight down. It doesn't just disappear. It falls, and things underneath it get crushed. One of those things was the picture I'd carried for 20-something years of my daughter and me being all right, of getting through her mother's death together and coming out the other side with something real still standing between us. I sat at that kitchen table and thought about a 7-year-old girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat on the drive home from her grandmother's, how I'd carry her inside so she wouldn't wake up. She'd been so small then. I let myself feel all of that on Monday evening. No shortcuts. Tuesday, I got up and moved forward. What happened after that, I didn't engineer, and I want to be clear about that. I made one phone call, one signed statement. I didn't reach out to Craig's colleagues, didn't call anyone at Ridgeline beyond Corinne, didn't post a word anywhere. I told the truth to one person with the authority to act on it, and the dominoes fell on their own weight. By Tuesday afternoon, I heard through Douglas, who kept his own ears to the ground in that world, that Ridgeline had frozen Craig's onboarding paperwork pending an internal review of his entire reference file. Legal had been looped in automatically the moment a flagged reference came back unverified. They didn't just pause the offer. They opened a file, which meant Craig Voss's name was now attached to a documented case of reference misrepresentation at one of the more conservative firms in the Midwest. And in a world as small and gossip-fast as institutional finance, that kind of flag doesn't stay quiet. It travels the way bad news always travels in a tight professional circle, politely and fast. By Tuesday evening, two other firms Craig had been quietly courting for a lateral move had stopped returning his calls. No emails answered. The professional version of a door closing softly, without a word of explanation needed. Douglas called me Tuesday night. "Walter, I don't know exactly what you told Corinne, but I just told her the truth." Douglas exhaled slowly. "Well, the truth apparently had somewhere important to be." Wednesday morning my phone started up. First call came at 7:48. "Craig." I looked at the screen and let it ring through to voicemail. "Not yet." He called again at 8:20, then 8:55, then sent a text that read, "Walter, we really need to talk. This has spiraled way past what it should have. I think there's a misunderstanding here. Please call me." Misunderstanding. An interesting choice of word from a man who typed my name into a legal disclosure without so much as a heads up. I didn't respond. At 9:40, Melissa called. I stared at her name on the screen a long moment. My daughter, my only child, the one who'd told me 3 days earlier to apologize or find somewhere else to spend the holidays. I let it ring. I needed her to arrive at the truth herself, not because I'd walked her there by picking up. That's the thing about truth. If you hand it to somebody, they can reject the delivery. But if they stumble into it themselves, in their own kitchen, at 10 in the morning, while their husband is making his 15th panicked phone call and the walls are finally coming down around them, it sticks differently. It sticks to the bone. What I learned later from Melissa herself, in a conversation I'll carry with me the rest of my life, was what had happened inside that house on Brookfield Lane that Wednesday morning. Craig had come home Tuesday night already cracking. The silence from his contacts had rattled him in a way she'd never once seen. He'd been on his phone till past midnight. By Wednesday, he'd gotten formal notice from Ridgeline's compliance office. The offer was rescinded. The file was flagged permanently, and the two firms he'd been courting had quietly, professionally made it clear there'd be no further conversation. And that's when Craig stopped performing. The charm went first, then the composure, then whatever careful scaffolding he'd built around himself in that house came apart at the joints. And underneath it wasn't the ambitious, polished man Melissa had married. It was somebody smaller and meaner, cornered and pointed, and he turned on her the way cornered people always turn on whoever's standing closest. He blamed her father. Said things I won't repeat because they aren't mine to repeat, but they made plain in the starkest possible terms exactly what Melissa had been to him. A door, that's all. A door with my name carved into it. By Wednesday afternoon, Melissa was sitting alone in that house on Brookfield Lane, Craig having driven off somewhere in a rage, her phone in her hand, staring at my name on the screen. 3 days after Thanksgiving weekend, just like I'd said she would. She thought my silence was punishment. It wasn't. It was the first time in over 20 years I'd let her face something without standing between her and the fall. And I won't lie to you, it cost me plenty to let her. There's a specific kind of knock you feel before you hear it. Not loud, not angry, desperate. I was in the garage that Wednesday, just past 3 in the afternoon, sorting through a box of my late wife's old holiday decorations, the kind of slow, mindless work that keeps your hands busy while your mind sorts through everything else. My phone had been face down on the workbench since noon. I wasn't hiding from it. I just wasn't available to it. There's a difference there, too, and most people confuse the two. I heard the knock from the garage. 3 times, careful, almost apologetic. I knew who it was before I'd even pulled off my gloves. I walked through the house slowly, looked through the narrow window beside the front door. Melissa, standing on my porch in a wrinkled flannel shirt, one she'd had since college, the one she wore when she wasn't trying to impress anybody. Hair not done, no makeup, eyes red in a way that told me she hadn't just started crying. She'd been crying for hours. 30 years old and standing there looking about 7, the way she'd looked the first weekend after her mother's funeral, standing outside my old apartment door, trying so hard to be brave about something no child should have to be brave about. I opened the door. She looked at me. Her chin trembled once, then she locked it down. Dad. Her voice was barely holding together. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd made my decision, where I'd sat in Sunday's stillness and felt everything inside me rearrange. I put the kettle on without asking. Melissa had taken to tea whenever something was wrong, ever since she was about 13. She didn't speak right away, just sat with her hands folded on the table, staring at them like they belonged to someone else. I set the mug down in front of her, sat across from her, and waited. He's not, she started, stopped. Craig isn't who I. She pressed her lips together hard. Take your time. He screamed at me, Dad. Her eyes came up, raw and unguarded. Not raised his voice, screamed, like I was the reason everything came apart. She laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it, like I was supposed to apologize because his fraud got caught. I kept my face steady, didn't rush her, let her land it herself. He said, she paused, and something moved across her face, shame, I think, mixed with the specific horror of a truth showing up too late to matter. He said the only reason he ever needed me around at all was because of your name, your connections. That without your reputation attached to his file, Ridgeline never would have even looked at him. She looked at me. He said it like it was my fault, for not delivering you properly. The kitchen went very quiet. Delivered, like I was a package. Like 31 years of professional integrity was a tool somebody could borrow without asking and hand back a little dented. Melissa, you tried to warn me at dinner. You weren't attacking me. You were just telling the truth, and She stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth for a second. I gave you an ultimatum, Dad, in my own house. I told you to find somewhere else to spend the holidays, and you just stood up and said 6 words and walked out. Yeah, she exhaled shakily. Yeah, you did. She wrapped both hands around the mug and stared into it. I've been doing that to you my whole life, haven't I? She said quietly. Every time something got uncomfortable, every time I didn't want to hear it, I made you choose between the truth and losing me, and you always chose me. She looked up. I called that love. But it wasn't fair. It was never fair to you. There it was. The thing I'd been waiting years to hear. Not because I needed the validation, I'd stopped needing that somewhere around 58, but because she needed to say it out loud for her own sake. No, I said carefully. It wasn't fair. She blinked. I think she'd expected something softer from me. I love you, I went on. I have loved you every day of your life, including Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and today. That was never in question. I leaned forward slightly. But I made a mistake, Melissa, for a long time. Every time you threatened to walk away, I folded. I thought I was protecting you. What I was actually doing was teaching you that my own limits didn't matter, that if you pushed hard enough, I'd always give. She went very still. Craig learned that same lesson, I said. Probably from watching the two of us. That landed. I watched it land. She didn't flinch away from it, which told me she'd already been sitting with some version of that thought long before she'd knocked on my door. So what do I do? She asked. And her voice had gone small in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. It was the smallness of somebody who's just had the architecture of her whole life cracked down the middle and is sitting in the rubble asking a real question. That's not mine to answer, I said. That one's yours. My phone buzzed on the counter. We both looked at it. Craig. Melissa's jaw tightened. He's been calling you all day. I know. Are you going to answer? I watched the screen until it stopped buzzing. No. She almost smiled. Almost. 3 minutes later, a voicemail notification popped up. I didn't move to play it, but Melissa looked over at the phone and said quietly, He called me 30 times between last night and this morning. The last few, he wasn't asking me anything anymore. He was just talking. Telling me everything he'd sacrificed, how everybody was against him, how I owed him loyalty. She shook her head slowly. I'd heard him sell himself before. I'd never once heard him beg. It's different. People show you who they are, I said, once the performance gets too expensive to keep running. She looked at me across the table, my daughter, 30 years old, sitting in the same chair she used to sit in as a teenager on nights when we'd eat cereal for dinner and watch old movies, because neither of us had the energy to try harder than that. I'm sorry, Dad. Not performed, not managed, just plain. I'm so sorry for what I said at dinner, and for everything that led up to it. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I know. We sat like that a while. Then I stood up and put the kettle on again. Craig called twice more that evening. The second call left a voicemail, 3 minutes and change long. I know because I played it once, alone, after Melissa had gone home. He opened with justifications, moved through explanations, and landed somewhere in the middle on something that resembled an apology, though it was really just a well-dressed request. He needed me to call Corinne, needed me to clarify the situation, needed me to explain there'd been a miscommunication, and that Craig Voss was a man of real integrity who'd simply moved a little too fast in his eagerness. A man of integrity, from a voicemail left by a man who'd forged a reference on a regulatory filing. I deleted it. I've thought a lot lately about what mercy actually looks like at 64. When you're young, you think mercy is softness. You think forgiveness means unlocking every door you ever closed. You think love means absorbing whatever gets thrown at you and coming back around smiling anyway. I don't believe that anymore. Melissa came back 2 days later. We talked again, longer this time, harder in places. She'd already spoken with a lawyer. She was asking the right questions, making the hard calls, and doing it without asking me to carry any of it for her. That was the thing that told me she was going to be all right. I told her she could call me any hour, for anything real. What I didn't tell her, what I didn't need to say out loud, was that the door she thought she'd shut on me that Saturday had never actually locked, because I'm her father, and that part doesn't negotiate. But the version of me that folded every single time she pushed, that man retired somewhere between the dinner table and the drive home that first night. Craig called one final time Thursday morning, just past 7, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I looked at the screen, let it go to voicemail, made my eggs, watched the Cardinals working the feeder in the backyard, read the paper straight through. Some men beg loud, I've come to think, because they spent their whole lives mistaking somebody's quiet for weakness. They never understand, not until the very end, that the quiet ones are usually the ones who knew exactly what they were holding the entire time.